I don't know how exactly hate crimes became a focal topic for me, but I do know it has little to do with the hate crimes themselves. Racism, anti-religious sentiment, gender animosity, these aren't topics that particularly interest me in and of themselves. What interests me more is busted media narratives. What interests me more is news organizations giving you a grotesquely skewed image of the world around you by misrepresenting or ignoring the data they claim to report on. It's subjective, but in my mind, the media narrative surrounding the alleged rise in hate crime in the era of Donald Trump is the most biased, lazy, and just plain irresponsible reporting of our time. Up until today, much of the doubt that reporting deserved was due to the quality of the available data. The data referenced to support the idea that the election led to a wave of hate crime came from the Southern Poverty Law Center and BuzzFeed, among some other sources, aggregating self-reports from sources like social media and their own submission pages. These sources amount to an unreliable book of fairy tales and other things that never happened. I have scrutinized these publications at length previously. You can find a link to my most recent video on the topic in the description. The problem with the data points in those publications is they aren't investigated incidents. They're simply claims, unvetted claims, and a significant portion of them, if not the majority, never were actually verified as provable bias incidents. To get verified vetted data takes time. You need police investigation, you need identification of a suspect, you need establishment of motive. All of that investigation and verification is time consuming, in addition to the time needed to compile all the data from local law enforcement agencies all across the country. And so the annual report the FBI assembles on hate crimes in the United States lags about a year behind. But today is the day, or rather, this week is the week, we finally get law enforcement vetted hate crime data for 2016, so we can reliably examine the prevailing narrative of the 2016 hate crime spike. The fact that I consider new hate crimes data from the FBI to be somewhat of an early Christmas gift just demonstrates my need for a vacation, but I find this data drop fascinating. First, because of the way the media are characterizing it, but more so because of what the data actually say if you take a deep and comprehensive look. If you read the headlines from early this week, you would think the writings of BuzzFeed and the Southern Poverty Law Center have been fully vindicated. The number of hate crimes rose in 2016, reports CNN, to a high point of recent history. Hate crimes up in 2016, FBI statistics show, says NPR. HuffPost writes, hate crimes rose about 5% in 2016, FBI report says, fittingly using a headline photo of a 2016 vandalism incident at a Rhode Island mosque, an investigation of which, as far as I can tell, never led to a conviction, charge, or even identification of a suspect. Of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center does what they do, a superficial analysis that ties the trend they select to Trump without evidence, and similar headlines even appeared in international publications as well. The CBC reports hate crimes surged in the US during the 2016 presidential election, and the BBC writes that hate crimes rise for the second straight year. Now, while that repeated specific claim presented here is accurate, FBI statistics show 6,121 hate crime incidents in 2016, a 5% increase from 2015's 5,850 incidents. That's a very limited point of analysis that doesn't actually tell us very much. Makes you wonder, is 1 year's change really all that meaningful? What's the broader picture? The FBI's hate crime statistics are available all the way back to 1996. Why wouldn't we look at the full picture of the trend over time? The answer is either that these media outlets are too lazy to look at the data in totality, or they have a false narrative to spin, or both, but neither are good looks. If we look at all the available data, hate crimes have actually declined by 45% over the last decade and a half. You can cut the data any way you like. The FBI reports hate crimes by incident, meaning each individual event. They report hate crimes by offenses, meaning each individual charge. They report hate crimes by the number of victims, and they report hate crimes by the number of offenders. But all the data points have the same trend in common. Adjusted for population, hate crimes are currently about half as common as they were at their high point in 2001. So while the media are focusing on this tiny increase here, they are ignoring the broader fact that hate crimes are at a historic low, not a historic high. And there's more information to add important context to this trend. Participation in the FBI's hate crime statistics reporting is optional for state and local law enforcement, though most law enforcement agencies do participate. In 2016, participating law enforcement agencies covered 290 million Americans, or about 90% of the population. However, in this latest year of data, participating law enforcement agencies were near an all-time high. As we can see, there has been increasing law enforcement agency participation over time. Meaning, as we are seeing more and more police reporting, we are seeing less and less reported hate crime for years. Yet these headlines describe a hate crime spike. It's an unrecognizable and dishonest representation of the last 20 years of data. But let's indulge them. Let's get myopic and focus on that tiny portion of the data that they want to focus on, that 5% increase in hate crime incidents between 2015 and 2016. The critical question to ask is an increase in hate crime against whom? We can see that 5% increase. Who is being targeted? If we take another look, we find another fact that isn't convenient for the prevailing narrative. That 5% increase is a difference of 271 individual hate crime incidents for the year. The question is, what is the nature of the hate in each of those crimes? In 249 of those cases, there is a single identifiable bias. 72% of those cases were racial in nature. 12% of them were religious. 9% were about sexual orientation. 4% were about gender identity, as in transgenderism. And 3% were about gender, as in anti-male or anti-female. And it should also be noted that just to keep up with population growth, we'd expect to see about 41 additional hate crimes for the year generally. So about 15% of the change we observe is explained just by population increase. But the fact remains, the bulk of the increase we observe for the year is an increase in racially motivated hate crimes. Racially motivated against whom? According to the data, the largest portion of the increase in racially motivated hate crimes in 2016 is crimes targeting white people. 49% of the increase in racial hate crime was anti-white hate crime. 21% was anti-Hispanic, 11% was anti-Native American, another 11% was anti-multiple races, 6% was anti-Arab, 2% anti-Hawaiian, and 1% anti-Asian. Additionally, note that from 2015 to 2016, anti-black hate crimes actually decreased very slightly, 0.33%. So what the media will report is a spike in hate crimes. They'll note how race motivates the bulk of the incidents, but they will omit the fact that the largest portion of the change in racial hate crimes from the previous year is an increase in anti-white motive. The rise in anti-white hate crime explains 40% of the yearly increase overall, and that is the biggest share for any one group, be it racial, religious, gender, disability, or otherwise. The narrative media present is an increasingly hostile and oppressive majority, when in fact the data show the exact opposite trend. This case is another illustration, just like the white male mass shooter claim I discussed last week, of media relying on our inability to read data. Whenever we see a data reference in a story or report, it's crucial not to take that reference as automatically authoritative or honest or correct. We must ask critical questions. How are the data measured? And in what window of time do the data fit? In this case, simply expanding the data time frame is the key to debunking the entire prevailing finding. More data are always better than less data. So when we see data presentations so narrowly limited, for example, one year-to-year change cited as some sort of trend, we must ask, why is the data presentation so narrowly focused, and what additional data might be available? That all takes time, of course, and so I don't blame your average media consumer who has to go to school or go to work or take care of the kids and doesn't have a few hours to vet each and every claim that comes before him. But I do blame these media outlets for not doing this analysis honestly themselves. I'm just a guy sitting in a makeshift home studio space who spent only a couple hours looking at the data comprehensively to realize the media reporting on it is entirely dishonest. honest. Surely it's not a resource problem for the CNNs and the Huffington Posts of the world. So what is their excuse? To them, we must ask, is it that you're lazy and you run headlines based on 5-second superficial data analyses, or is it that you're deliberately lying to us? Pick your poison, but either way, you've got some splaining to do. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.